1 second to share this. I think froze on me, which certain problems. If you're in here and it's easy to do, just please go over and share the link into the previous thing. I wish I could do so easily. We'll wait for 1 second. Actually, I'll use 1 second. I'll give 1 minute for people to get in here because I screwed this up, or I didn't screw it up, but it froze for a second. So I'm going to take care of one thing real fast that I said I would do, and then I will be right back with you. I'm just giving this a second to get started because I actually do have a big idea that I want to get to in this. And you know, I don't know where that diaper is, so it's going to have to wait a minute. There's nothing I can do about that. Okay, good. You're back, Corey, I'm sure. Give me 1 second. The stupid thing cut out again. I switched to a new stream. I'm looking for the diaper, but I don't know where it is. I'll look a little more in a bit. Anyway. Oh, wait. What was that? All right, just hand it to me. I'll take it down right now. I'm going to give people a chance to transfer over. You what? That's fine. I didn't say you were. All right. So, anyway. All right. Now, let me get back to this. So, what was I saying? I was saying domestic politics. Okay, and welcome back, by the way. Sorry for you people. I did start the show earlier this morning, and YouTube cut out on me, as it often does. I'm just trying to get a little settled. I thought I was going to have a quieter morning than I did, but it's ended up being unexpectedly busy, which is fine. Happens. I'm not upset about it. I just have to adapt a little bit more than I thought and get back in my comfy spot. All right, super short version of what I was saying. For those who came in late, I was basically saying there was a question between predestination and free will that ended up being a fight at the heart of our culture. In America, we actually sort of believe in predestination originally, but the Masons, who were behind the American Revolution, shifted that around, killed religion, brought back free will, and now we live in an age of humanism, okay? Which is fine, but that's what we live in. And humanism has systems that are majoritarian, where we basically believe the quantity of opinions, the quantity of stuff, the quantity of development is more important than the quality of the ideas. And we live that way, and I'll give you proof of it. We value our life by the quantity of our material status. If you want to think of it this way, economics is fundamentally about quantity, right? Politics, if it was actually technically run right, would be about the quality of a system. It would be a restraint upon it. But you see how economics runs politics through both big things and the fact of what people care about and what they vote for. Think of inflation being the biggest issue right now as an easy example. Or also the way actually politicians behave, right? That if you want to control a politician, you're better off having a $100,000 contribution than you are having a really good idea. Simple enough to understand, right? And this is why I don't talk about domestic politics. It talks through the language of majority and equality to restrain the ability to change anything because the world fundamentally operates in economics. So the people who run the world, they leverage financial systems to control economics. Remember, finance is the control of substitution of value over economics, which is the behaviors of people. So they give you shiny things so you follow what they say. And then they fight the wars over the only thing history has ever been fought over, will and faith. So we imagine, and the mythos of our current society is that we are an egalitarian society who are fighting over ideas, over who has whatever the most people agree to is right, and we trust that there's a groupthink wisdom, not that we're all just running off a bridge, which, these days you better be careful. You jump over there, if it's anything like it is out west, there won't be any water at the bottom of it. But it has me thinking about the fight. Because in Pineland, we basically started off with an idea that there's two choices. You fight or you run. That's what it really comes down to in the end. And Pineland's basic idea has been you run with people who think like you do to get away from the problems that are easy to predict. And we go through those every week. I don't, you need me to repeat them for you. You know, the threat of thermonuclear war, of pandemics, of, you read about different things that are coming out now, airborne AIDS, who knows? Um, we could go through it for hours. And we do, and we have, and you know them. But solutions, right? Or you fight. And if you fight people, and I watch people fight, and they're like, I'm going to run for office. I mean, why? Elections are fixed. And the Congress is bought. You want to be the one gadfly who gets, like the one guy in the Republican Party who was reporting on how they were having these orgies, with all these Republican congressmen. And what do? They attack the messenger. And you see this over and over again. Like I've been watching on Telegram, different channels get shut down who are basically mainstream right channels. They're saying, oh, we're getting shut down because we're being called Nazis. Well, everyone gets called a Nazi except the Azov Battalion, which is kind of funny. But that's what happens when you leverage control. And so what I realized was that the battle we're fighting is not over politics. If you care about politics, you've missed it. And look, I'm guilty of that. I'll own that. I did spend a lot of years to understand these things. Instead, we're fighting battle of faith against faith. And the people who once believed in God and in his will now believe that essentially he serves to benefit us. And that's why I suppose I am a Calvinist, because I believe our higher purpose is to serve God and his intentions rather than God to be here for our benefit, which is sort of how I invert free will in my mind. Not that we don't have choices and not that they don't have virtue, but we don't have faith. We have humanistic faith, and humanistic faith is ecumenical. It says as long as you love God, and there's not the line between new evangelical teachings, between Catholic ecumenicism, between sort of like the namby-pamby universalist, congregationalist, and for that matter, a Reform Judaic rabbi, or certain Shia Muslim clerics, is not big. It's because it's all the idea that, well, God is one and we are part of him, and there's a unity there. But and I went into the theology a little bit in the beginning, which I'll do another day. In fact, I'll probably do a sermon on that, not this Sunday because I got something to talk about, but maybe next Sunday to offer some thoughts, and we'll see if it sticks with you. Because this is hard stuff we're talking about, and I don't want to run from things that are hard that we may disagree upon. And look, it's not for the Christians in the audience. These are not salvation issues; these are eschatology issues, which is the question of how you find your connection to God, how you find your way to heaven. Those sort of questions. But it's important in terms of how we structure our society, because ultimately we believe we are right versus God is right, and we act that way and we live that way, and it's a sort of sinful way to live. And by sinful, let's say in a humanistic sense, I mean indulgent and decadent. So we follow our material desires, and people who follow their material desires usually will and desire are at odds with one another. Desire is the temporary urge to fulfill what one is feeling in a moment, and will is more like the harnessed energy to accomplish a larger goal that requires some degree of self restraint or some sacrifice, whether it's moral sacrifice, whether it's energetic sacrifice, whatever it is. It's long term versus short term, okay? If you want to think of it in the simplest terms. The people who are shaping our society, the technocrats, have a faith. They have a faith that man can live this way forever. Science will save us, and whatever sacrifices they offer in the name of science, they're willing to offer up freely to their god of physical immortality. And their faith, though I find it disgusting and apostate, is that which is driving the world. The idea that there's a perfect system to run things, that we can be a part of that system, that we can be our best selves, that we reach our fulfillment, our apotheosis, if you like the fancy word, in being part of that system, in becoming part of that system, and in transforming ourselves. And this is the alchemy of it. It was, these Middle Age terms that still exist. People just don't use them. But technomancy leads to the alchemy of sublimating self to become part of the collective, which is why you see the technocrats hanging out with the woke collectivists, because they ultimately want the same thing. They want to be part of a machine where we all realize the highest thing they can imagine, which is material equality in the physical plane. And while the lower end people think that's just passing politics where, you get a bigger wage, at the high end, what the confluence of ideas is the idea to make humanity so that our physical needs are met equally, and so that we are all part of something that, if we make it, even if it's equally fantastic, that there is no preferential choice of A being better than B. That's why you see transhumanism. That's why you see woke gender ideologies. That's why you see all these things, because they want to make all things equal to all other things. And in a lot of ways, that's death, because there is no distinction. There is no better. There's simply good enough. And you can see through the ideologies, whether it's the way they look at science, the way they look at integrating bionics into people, or the way they look at their political ideologies. That's what they push. They're like, oh, well, if we're all poor, at least we're poor together. Okay. Against that, if there was going to be resistance, those of us who run away and run away to run away another day, ultimately will be hunted down by these people. There's no question of that. And it's a tenet of faith, especially for the Christian, that that's something we expect. You can't read the book of Revelation and not think of it that way. You can't read, Matthew 22 and not see in the words of Christ that that's going to happen. And even if you don't see that way, okay, let's say you're not someone who's there in your faith yet, and I hope you get there. Disinformation boards, coming out there, shadow banning, mass censoring, the FBI basically serving as a clearinghouse for the government. Or the example, there was a group in Wisconsin called Jones something, I forget the name of it, but they basically attacked a church because they were anti-choice. And I saw that little red harlot, Jen Psaki, go up there and apologize for them. Because, hey, we have to defend murder. We have to defend the right to internally murder. And whether you think of abortion as that or not, you should. But if you don't, whatever. It won't be lost on anyone in this audience that there's a one-way street where if you don't believe this, the state sees you as something to be destroyed, to be murdered, and to be turned into, I don't know, maybe a future food source. I mean, if some of the stuff Dana tells me she's been hearing about in the prophetic is true, and I intend to believe her in this case for sure, that may be the long-term plan for a lot of us. And, that's something that's heavy, and people aren't ready to hear that. But today's one of those days where I got on because I had some truth I wanted to share, and we'll see. We'll see if it's received. And if it isn't, okay. I just put it out there for the one who might hear it, who understands some of this. So, if you're going to fight this, and you don't have the ability to fight with even odds, you don't have the money, you don't have the people, all you can turn to is God, and trust that God has enough power to get things done. And the reorientation, I think, of political resistance is going to shift from the political sphere, which is useless. We all know the Republicans are going to win the next election. Nothing's going to change because they have no incentive. They are happy with their lot in life. But those of us who believe in something higher, because they don't, they believe in power. They believe in their own self-importance. The vainest people on all sides, are put forward. But they don't really believe. I mean, conservatism as an ideology. Don't do that. I mean, get off my damn lawn is funny as a meme. It's sad as a governing ideology. But that's what happens when you're morally corrupt, because they say, oh, well, we support free market economics. Okay, do what you want and get off my lawn. That's what our basic American consensus has become. And such a land will come to immorality because we say, well, look, yeah, they're awful. What am I going to do about it? Nothing. And then your kids suffer, and your kids' kids suffer, and eventually the whole thing falls apart. You can run, and you have to run, and take people with you who understand this. But it may be the case that between running and fighting, it's a false duality. Because the technocrats you're fighting against are not going to honor the old agreement of live and let live and leave this alone. Good to see you, Joe. God bless. What's going to happen is that we're going to see those who want the technocracy, those who want the chips in the people, those who want, the UBI system and the central digital currency. Now crypto's going away as an alternative, which isn't surprising because they control the infrastructure. Not shocking. The DARPA and the big banks, okay, we would have expected that. And our ability to exist outside that on subsistence, okay, there's not going to be a lot of food. And if you try to do it individually and you're growing things, if you can get around all the laws being put in, you could actually manage to own a piece of land. It won't be long before the tax assessors take it, or your neighbors will come after you, because the artificial scarcity that's being pushed is an inducement to destroy your self-sufficiency. And if you have enough people who exist outside the system, like Pineland posits, it won't be long before you're branded as terrorists, food hoarders, and people working against the good of society. I mean, we understand. We understand in Orwell's world, you cannot have a successful alternative. Which is why it asks the question if we're going to fight. And if we're going to fight, what basis are we going to fight on? And we haven't been willing to fight because we haven't been willing to identify our enemy, and we haven't been willing to know ourselves. And if we're going to fight for what is good, then we need to define what is good. I'm a preacher. I come on Sundays and I define good as that which God wants, that which Christ talks about, that which the Father followed. And what I will tell you, and this is what we do on the Sons of Dust sermons, but a lot of people aren't ready for it, is there are times, yes, there's lots of love, there's lots of mercy, but there's lots of justice. And the Bible's a violent book. Now, am I asking for you to induce you to some massive riot? No, but I will tell you, if fight comes, and even in Joel 2, this is in the Bible, and in the day of the Lord there will be an army lifted up of people who are willing to fight with the courage of lions for the Lord. This is biblical, um, as well as logical, because those two always seem to go together if you understand it enough. We are going to have a thought in ourselves of something bigger than ourselves that we're willing to fight for, die for. And why aren't we willing to fight? Fear for what we'll lose, some of it, a lot of it, but people get past that in their faith. But then we have this false hope that everyone can be saved. And I've watched this torture a lot of people I care about over the years. My wife is one of them, but she's not the only one. And none of us want to believe this idea that some people just aren't meant to be saved. We say that politically, but then we say theologically maybe we can reach them. And the Lord says, and this is one of those quotes, is that it's his will that none be lost, and yet Christ and the Father say many different times there are going to be very few. And so maybe we need to do the work of fighting for what is true and stop trying to get everyone on board and protect one another and let the story play out as God intends, that those who elected to be part of him will reveal themselves in the fullness of time. Because really, the one thing I think anyone who does missionary work understands, and ultimately when you're trying to convince someone to believe anything, it's missionary work, is that people are going to make their own decisions in their own time for their own reasons. No one's opinion is changed through the political process. We just learn to hate one another. No one's opinion is changed through economic poverty, where we learn to hate others, or economic wealth, where we learn to love ourselves. Instead, it's through how we look at where we fit into the world and how we begin to understand ourselves and what our purpose is that the world changes. And you see throughout history, usually the great tragedy, but it does happen, where eventually the system becomes so broken that someone, some group, something stands up like a great awakening and says, no, this is wrong. We must change ourselves to change this. And everything changes, and everything that seemed inevitable goes away because we understand the systems are the yokes we wear upon our necks. Okay? The system that we wear on our neck as a yoke is technology. It's the worship of the image of ourselves as reality TV, as internet, as all these things where we watch and fixate on ourselves. And we think, oh, this is so great. I can meet my constant desire. And we become literally like Echo staring into the pond. Narcissus, rather, staring into the pond while Echo is crying for him, to the point where she becomes lost and he becomes a flower staring endlessly, and that's his punishment. It's a Greek mythology story, but a telling one, because that's what we've become. And I find myself thinking this morning, after some prayer, some contemplation, we have to change how we look at other people and how we look at ourselves. We have to demand more of one another and demand the ability to pull ourselves away from society if we're going to change anything. And will we save the world by doing that? No. I mean, we couldn't anyway, but even if everyone did it, we could. But we might save ourselves or reveal that we were the ones who were saved. And there's a big difference in those two things, because you get disheartened when you try to reach people and you can't. And we assume that it's a failure of our own, or that in a better time or a better system. But the reality is most people are damned, and they're damned by their own actions and by their unwillingness to expand beyond their own desire. And whether you call that free will, like John Wesley would have, that I made the choice to embrace Christ, or whether you could call it predestination, like someone like George Whitfield, the guy who was responsible for the Great Awakening, would say, where, it was the voice of God being heard inside you. It's ultimately the same place you end up, that you and God find yourself at one, fighting against a system that is against you. And that's the faith, and that is what we've lost. And that's where the fight has to come back from, you know? And, maybe it's not helpful to get into the deeper theology of why these things work, but it's kind of useful if you start thinking about it, because it simplifies the question for me. Are you waiting for people to come to God in the eternal, unending age of mercy, where Christ himself has to wonder if no man will be left, or are we living in an age in the future where we are seeking to live the will of God as best we can and accept those who are lost along the wayside are the ones we could never reach and that they never had a chance of reaching, which is equally, I hate to say it, a biblical message. And it's a vivid point I ask to you guys because my audience is very smart. You've seen a lot. You've seen the world is breaking. You mainly listen because you want to know how to survive that. But how we turn this around, how we reorient ourselves, right, is a question we cannot escape much longer. And whether the end comes tomorrow, salvation, today's the day of salvation, tomorrow's not promised, right? And you don't even have to be a Christian actually to understand that we could be a nuclear war tomorrow, and then you won't have any other choices. You'll just have lived the choices you made. So if you chose to live in the city, you have certain wealth, whatever. All right, you accept certain risks for certain benefits. And usually those are a material consideration, and we accept that. By the way, we accept if people say, "Oh, if someone went to you and said, someone went to you and said, John, just picking a name at random, be like, you know what, I don't want to go shop here because I don't like your politics. Someone would be mad. But if someone says, John, you can't come here because you don't have enough money, people are like, oh, that's perfectly fine. And that's a system just as much as any other one. That's a system of compliance. It's a system of a set of built-in things. But we accept that system because that's the morality we accept. That we can trade an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We accept that barter's more legitimate than caring for people. And there's all sorts of consequences that come for that. And eventually, and this is what happens historically, is that when people get poor enough, they support systems that are much more communalistic, where the idea is people have to take care of one another. Because if they don't, they can't make it. The luxury of individualism is the legacy of the wealth of the West, but only in the era of this rampant individualism, which, by the way, wasn't what Christ practiced. Or if you read the book of Acts, it wasn't what the original Christian communities practiced. And the sad thing in American and largely Western politics is that we have the idea that morality is on one side and collective responsibility is on the other. In fact, the Bible teaches the exact opposite, but this is what, evil is. It's the separation of good by mixing truth with untruth to the point of poisoning the whole thing. Because rampant individualism was never seen as a good thing. We think it's a good thing because it's convenient, because it comes to our selfish sin of pride, and it really fits into the way we see the world. Which isn't to say that I'm not saying it's an absolute evil to have things you earn. To earn things, to keep things is fine. To have certain pleasures, fine. There are joys that are welcome to you. Paul lays them out. I think it's in Ephesians, but I could be wrong. It's been a minute. But we think that way. And we morally think that way. And people get to the point to be like, well, and the argument is, I worked for this, you didn't, so therefore I deserve it. Okay, that's fine. And I understand the ethos of that which is invested is that which is gained. But on the other hand, you know what? If we follow that to its absolute pinnacle, where we separate ourselves, and you end up with a society, let's say, where you have one person owning everything and everyone else owning nothing, that's unstable. And ultimately, from your moral responsibility, if you accept one, to try to at least speak truth to people and have some degree of love for one another, because that level of humanism is called for. The idea that we have equality is what it's converted to, where we love everything. We need to have love, but we need to have love with judgment. It's like the parent who lets their kid go nuts versus the parent who teaches their children, who educates them, who disciplines them. And it's the extremes of sort of humanist ideology that get us into trouble. So all of these things combine, and they put us in a position where our ability to have a future doesn't exist. Because at the end of it, we don't trust ourselves rightly to make these decisions. So we have to ask who we're going to trust. The modern answer is we trust the system. The system will build a machine. The machine will have the answers. And we build a Tower of Babel with cool zeros and ones. Might look like the Matrix. The older solution was we understand there are things beyond our understanding. We pray and ask with humility and faith, help us, Lord. This will be the battle at end of times. I have no doubt of it. And I think we're closer to that battle. Good to see you, Keelan, than a lot of people understand. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing about faith or spirituality or religion or theology. But Theology was once understood as the queen of sciences. And if you're going to offer something to the faith of absolute human egalitarian utopianism, where you can believe and practice whatever you want, you better have something really good to offer, or your battle's already lost. And this battle, these are not isolationists. These are missionaries with an activist, universalist, converting zeal. They're going to come after you, and they're going to keep coming, and they're not going to stop because they believe they're right. They believe they are just. They believe in themselves. And we don't. We don't believe in ourselves because we don't believe in this world and we don't believe in our place in it. So we got to find something to fight for. That's it. And we could all go down as martyrs, and there's a lot to be said for dying in the blood of martyrs. That's how the Christian faith was built. But ultimately, you're still going to need something on the other side of it. Unless we're all just meant to die here in the end and then be lifted up. And if we are, then that's it. That's God's plan. Amen. But if that was God's plan from the beginning, we wouldn't have even had the chance, because there were plenty of people at some point who said, this is enough and we're going to fight this. And dare I say, with puritanical zeal, they separated themselves. They chose to live a certain way. And when they got pushed hard enough, they fought back. And they did what they had to do to protect their own. And they understood they weren't going to save everybody. They understood that there was always going to be a select few. And they were okay with it because they cared more. I think of a preacher who sits in a small country church, maybe has 3 or 4 people in there, who gets up there every Sunday and gives a good, honest, wholesome message. No one celebrates that guy. They think he's a fool. But if he's speaking truth, he isn't a fool. The world is a fool for not considering him. And my life as a dissident, and living in humility, and chasing after ideas that are more true than this world, you begin to see what we've given up. You begin to see a prize of something greater, of a truth that should never be surrendered, of a truth that can transcend life itself. That is the only eternal thing. Because if something is not eternally true, even the people who are technocrats will say the heat death of the universe is an inevitability. They're promising you the hell at the end of the story. They're just giving you a much longer time. And isn't that the American way? Take something out on credit, lay away so we can pay for it later. So we don't have to deal with the consequences now. But I think I'd rather be accounted. I think of that preacher in the country. I think of that lone activist who goes out there, says truth, and gets shut down. I've lived this life. And many of you have too. And many of you have been scared. And I understand. And you think, well, I have to make these compromises to survive in this world. And the world's wrong. And you say, that's just the way things are. Well, why is it the way they are? What is the misorientation? How do we begin pushing back against that? And the answer is not political. Not at all. Because we'll never have that power. And the answer is not economic, because we're not printing money out of thin air. We could, and if we would trust that it meant something, and crypto proved this. Crypto was as much BS as fiat, if you come down to it. We just created other stories about it. We're like, the emperor wore no clothes. Yes, but the prime minister's suit looks better. Okay, that's what we did with money. It was a matter of what we wanted to believe. We wanted to believe scarcity creates value. That's what we wanted to believe. And there's truth in that. I want what I can't get. Nobody wants what everyone can get, unless they artificially trick you into thinking it's scarce, or they trick you into thinking something's better than something else. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. But truth, in the Bible, Christ says the wise man is someone who goes searching and he finds one pearl worth so much wisdom that he sells everything else and just to keep that one pearl. And that's truth. And your own search for truth, I think as humans, we're very bad at knowing truth. But we're actually better at knowing lies than we think. So I think that while finding truth is something we will fight over, this world is so full of lies at this point, we could spend a lifetime discarding such obvious ones. And we don't fight them. And we don't fight the lies. We accept the lies even though we know they're lies, because we don't stand on truth. And truth is, like I said, it's not political. It's not economic. It's ultimately, it's beyond philosophical. It's theological. What is the highest good? How do I stand for it? And I think about that a lot. And I think that we always are willing to compromise in mercy because we want to help people. And there's a lot to be said for that. God himself accepts that argument sometimes. Moses literally makes that argument to God in the desert and says the 2 parts. Number 1, it's your mercy. And number 2, your name will be degraded if you rescue the Israelites and then get rid of them all. Because God says in the Bible to Moses, he basically says, let me erase all these people. We'll start over with you. I can do just as good or better. And Moses doesn't go for that. Joshua, interestingly, for a little while does. And to their benefit, in the Bible anyway, the Israelites inherit Canaan until they start making compromises. And then from that come the problems that come today, because the Canaanites become the Philistines, Palestinians, they become the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians become, anyway, you can trace it through history. They're the Venetians who end up being the bankers who sit in Amsterdam, New York, and London. Same people who are running things. The Bilderbergs, it's no accident they're sitting there in Benelux. They've been there for a long time. They literally, actually, Tyre was an island. Then they went from there to Venice, which is a swamp. Then they went to Amsterdam, which was a dugout swamp. London, which has a swamp. DC, which is a swamp. You see my point. You can't drain the swamp. You could choose not to go to it. I mean, Rome eventually sort of dug the swamp, but the point is, we got to think differently. And I guess I had myself thinking that, and I guess this was the point I wanted to make. Pineland as a philosophy is very bright because it's about taking good people who want to do the right thing and get away from this. And it's a personal philosophy you can run with. But if it was ever going to be a bigger movement, we talk about running instead of fighting because we know we can't save people. But if we're truly honest with ourselves, when we run, we're going to have to fight too because they're not going to let us get away. And that being the case, it almost becomes incumbent that as we run, we also fight at the same time and say, you know what, we don't want your systems, but we are going to pull ourselves out of this. And then who's saved? The elect, the people who chose. And do you want to believe it's free will, those who come along, or were those always the people that were going to be? But here's the danger, and this is the temptation that gets good people in trouble. The compromise we make of our own morality to try to save everyone makes us lose our ability to save the ones we can save. We can't live in between. It's killing us. And we've tried to. I mean, look at the system now in America. Does the system work because of the grifters on the system? Does it work because of the politicians? No, it works because decent people who still believe in ethoses, which are sold to them, though they're never practiced by the people in charge, follow through. They pay their taxes. They go to work. They do all these things. They fund the very system that destroys themselves and that funds the more immorality against them. That funds the schools where you're taught that the ancestral stock is terrible, where the ideas that built this civilization are awful, and where those people who have nothing but an unending cry for "give me more," we have to pay them. We have to bribe them. We have to. This is what we do. And it's not just this country, all throughout Europe, probably the world. I mean, I don't know every system, but the ones I do know all fit this model. And if you're going to stand against that, if we're going to build something that lasts, and think of this in your own family, your own life, your community, whatever it is, you need a different basis to build upon. Politics is discord. I mean, that's the whole idea of pluralism. It's that if ideas fight, the strongest will emerge. That's a death trap. And not that there isn't going to be a fight. Just like I said, there's always a fight. But I guess the idea is that really has been fixated on my mind is just that maybe the truth is few people are meant to make it, that we will find each other by doing the right things, and that while I'm not going to go out there and argue that we need to go looking for fights with people who will destroy us, on the other hand, we've been very kind to people who've been very cruel for a very long time. And I know they would not pause for a second to remove us in any way they can. And the fact that they go about it slowly so they be picked off quietly one by one into irrelevancy so that good itself can be extinguished because love is greater than justice. That isn't it. Love is a great value. God's mercy knows no bounds. And I go to God because I think of this in the highest terms I can imagine, which is the greater value, love or justice. And the answer is you cannot have justice without holiness. You cannot have mercy without holiness because there's no care other than self-care. And that's not what Christ taught either. He taught love God above all else. That's the first thing. And he taught the second thing was that you had to love one another as you love yourself. But the first thing had to come before the second because if it didn't, you couldn't figure out what was good. And so how do we get our good from something we cannot possibly know? We have to ask questions. We have to have the wisdom of a child. We have to seek truth constantly. And we have to learn from become the example that Christ set for us. We have to be willing to restructure our whole way of thinking, and people are not willing to do that. We look at the Bible, if we're really honest, and I'm as guilty as anyone of this. We look at a book of morality as a buffet. We pick the pieces we like. We like the parts about morality. We don't like the parts about taking care of people financially, giving away to help others. So we do that. Or we take one part and we pick and choose and we appropriate the book, but we don't actually try to do it. And I wonder if we have it in us in these end times. And I wonder if this isn't the gift of tribulation. And honestly, I genuinely believe this is why these days are working out the way they do before humanity transforms themselves so much that the creator can't recognize his creation, which is, something else that we need to talk about more, that we're going to have, included DNA from other species, that we're going to have bionic modification. But tribulation is forcing us to give up the things in the world we loved, to realize that they were transitory and had no value. And it's a learning lesson, honestly. Honestly, life in a lot of ways is like being in a spiritual boot camp. And I wonder so often if that isn't the whole purpose of life, that we are living in time, which is God is timeless. So we are living in a strange reality that we can't understand. Some of us have played with some things and we figured out ways to take peeks outside of that reality. Very dangerous thing you probably shouldn't do, but those of us who have done it have been changed by our experiences, and we see things differently. I think it's fair to admit that. I know a lot of my audience has done that because y'all have told me about it. So, and you begin to see truth is eternal and timeless. Plato talked about this. This is not new. This is 2,500 years old. He talked about how there were forms and that we were just shadows of them. The allegory and the cave and the Republic, for those who, know their history. That we see a shadow of a thing and that we think that's solidity. And life is the shadow. The reality is eternal. This is temporal. But we think it's the other way around. And that's the way it always is with these things, that there's an inversion. So I guess my message to you, as we watch all these things happen around us, is we have to take time to walk away from the insanity. We have to walk away from the fixation of our image that's shaping our mind, that's making it impossible for us to escape this prison of constant stimulation, and find ourselves. Take a moment in prayer. Read the Bible. If you haven't read it, read it more. Start with the Gospel. Start with the Gospel of John, actually. If you haven't, that's probably as good a place as any to get a feel for what the Christian faith is. But even if you don't believe, all right, fine. Take a walk. Go away for a little bit. Let the world come to you instead of the world being created around you. We've always had the world created around us, and that's what's blinded us from the temptation from the very beginning. And that's what evil is. Evil doesn't really have power. Evil has one tool, and it's a really effective one. It's the idea that through deception, that good can be achieved more quickly and with less cost. That's what it is. It's that everything can work out instead of some things not working out. And the reality is some things don't work out. And whether you think that's because of free will, because people make bad choices, because we're self-absorbed, and that's the nature of sin, or whether you think that God just said it's going to be that way anyway, and you can't help it, without loss there can't be gain. Okay, so we don't have to get into the eschatology, because the whole 17th century, second half, was fought over that. And we have strong opinions about it. My wife and I don't even agree, but that's okay. It doesn't actually matter. Because this is something only God can know, and eventually he'll tell us, and he'll probably say it's both in a way that we can't even understand. That's the way God is. Contradictions go away because he is no contradiction. He is one. And we are many. But we are not meant to be one, save in through the Lord. And this is my point to you. The radical egalitarianism that uses technology is coming after all of us. Our time is limited. Finances will be removed from us. You already see that happening. They're doing it slow so that the frog doesn't know it's boiling. That's all that crypto billionaires hopefully you cashed out. But even when you have, if you're in there, they're going to use laws against you. They're going to use appropriation. I mean, you can read the history of what utopian regimes do, of how they take money from rich people or people with assets, And if you have an army to defend yourself, great. I hope it's great. Joe Biden told you at the beginning of it. You guys think you're going to resist? Can you stand against nukes in F-16? Russia isn't. If you think they're even fighting it, they're not really doing. I mean, they're doing okay, but from what I'm reading, their country's destabilizing. And not just from our sources, by the way. I look into some of their own stuff. Even though the people want more, their government can't handle it, which is interesting. The people have will, but the leadership isn't there. And why isn't the leadership there? Because it's offering secular worldly solutions where all you're doing is fighting to stop someone else instead of building something more. when this country was first settled, the people came here were trying to build something more. They were running away from a very corrupt regime. They were running away from the Stuarts in England. The first big wave to New England was when, after James Stewart, famous for the King James Bible, his son Charles I comes in there, who ends up getting beheaded by Cromwell. And a lot of people during that time frame ended up running to New England because they wanted to live in a godly society and they had laws. And one could argue they went too far and they were too zealous. Okay, maybe they were, and that their interpretations weren't correct, but they were trying to live, and they were the most literate society in the world at that point. Actually, they emphasized individual literacy, and there's something in this. I want to bring this piece out. Literacy was important because the word itself is an abstraction. It's a symbolic representation of an idea that makes you think in your head. It makes you smarter. An image is a direct physical link that makes you just immersed in a moment. It makes you dumber. Okay, in aggregate. If you want to have someone smart, and you could do a simple test, I'm sure, and no one's ever done it because it would be unpopular, but if you had someone who's educated solely through books, or you can actually kind of look at this indirectly. You look at the vocabulary levels of someone who grew up in 120 years ago with the primer books they used to use. They would speak like Teddy Roosevelt did, 9 languages, they'd read everything, they'd have this massive knowledge, and they weren't blinded to images. And now we got Welcome to Costco, I love you, because we are caught in the image. Which is why, they weren't supposed to be graven in. It is why there were icon breakings, why there were all these things. Because we have always been most vulnerable through our eyes. Because we take things in so heavily, we can't understand them. And what has ended up happening is that power has deliberately, in conjunction with other senses, through, hypnotic suggestion, through certain sound things, waves, you start studying like theta waves, gamma waves, the things that are done out there. We've been under mass hypnosis through mass media for a very long time. And you can resist it if you know it's being done to you. But if you don't know it's being done to you, it's devastating. And it's only getting faster and earlier and stronger. And, what was it? Marshall McLuhan, the famous thing, the media is the message, what was it? The medium is the message. Okay, that's what it is. How you take information determines how you process it. And how you process it determines your outcome. So you think... It's like you have a fight over a house. One side wants red paint. One side wants blue paint. But you've been hearing your whole life the need to paint your house, and no one ever asks, why are you painting your house? Why not leave it natural wood? Or whatever it is. And maybe there's a good reason. And maybe there isn't. But it's the questions that don't occur to you that get you in trouble. So what we're going to try to do more and more here, because... honestly, you don't need me to come on here and tell you every way you're going to die. It's coming. You're going to die. Bad news. Odds are higher every day given the things that are happening in the world. I'll give you warnings. But you need to learn how to live. And I can't really tell you that, but I can tell you how smarter people, better people, God for one, in the person of Jesus, was able to do that in what he said. And try to find some of those answers by living them. And if we can't figure out what's right, maybe we can figure out what's wrong. And then we can build a consensus on what's right and stand and say, hey, I don't need to be a party with you anymore. Because the one conversation, my wife and I have a lot of interesting conversations at night. And I know she likes when I spend this time with her in the morning, but I needed to share this message with you guys. And I know she's listening anyway. So we'll continue our conversation when I go up there. Just she and I. Is that... we have to begin finding a way to live in this world where we don't want to live in this world. Most of my audience, a lot of my audience, don't like this world. For myself, I would be happy if the Lord called me home today or tomorrow, as long as I don't leave my wife unanswered and, chickens, snakes, turtles, all the animals. It's fine. But I'd be happy to go home. I've made my peace with that. I'm old and I'm tired. And maybe I should be that old. Maybe I'll have to find energy somewhere. Maybe the Lord will bless me with that for one more task. But for the moment, let's just say I'm tired. And I know she's tired too because she's had to deal with sickness. This is Lyme Awareness Month. And one of those diseases no one gives a shit about because COVID and everything else. But it was one of the first bioweapons. And it's awful. And actually, after our own experience with COVID, I kind of have a better understanding of my wife. So I guess I'm grateful in some small way for the empathy, even though the two of us just sit there at late at night and we'll be like, neither of us have energy to do things that have to be done, but somehow has to somehow get something Oftentimes it's me, but when she can help, she does, and God bless her for trying. I know how hard it is for her now, and I have a lot more empathy, and I'm grateful for her. Always am. She's my joy. Um, but living in the world when it's this broken is a death sentence for all of us. We can't grow, we can't learn, we can't do anything, and whatever we have to take out to do that, if we're doing so because that's good, yeah, we try to do it the right way. We try to walk away. We try to do our thing, but ultimately you're not meant to compromise with evil. You're not meant to meet people halfway. You're not meant to do those things. And if that means the one thing I've seen in the Bible, the Lord has no compunction about removing evil. He sees it as a good thing. I mean, the flood's the story of it. And yeah, do we have mercy? Do we know the answers to this? No. But if we try to speak to, and this is the difference. There's a difference between having a big idea and going out there to fight people. That's not what the Lord says. But if you have a big idea that fits his vision and you're fighting for it and they come after you, well, that's self-defense. You know, Augustine, go read City of God. He talked about it, about what a just war is. And a just war is coming because a war that remakes humanity in the image of ourselves instead of the image of our Creator would be a just war. And that war is coming. A war to prevent humanity from uploading itself to the Matrix to the point where we're destroyed from our reality and from whatever things we couldn't understand about ourselves we never tried to understand because we just were so happy to live in something where we didn't have to deal with suffering. Okay, but it won't be real anymore. It won't be... I mean, anything we can imagine is less than what we were because something greater than us made us. And that vision, we're either going to support that or we're going to support our own humanistic vision. And technocracy has already claimed the ground of greater humanism. I'll give it up. I mean, Christ said, what greater love does a man have than his willingness to die for his other man? But greater than that still is the willingness to give yourself up for the Lord and to die for him. That's what God did. I mean, that's honestly, that was the ultimate sacrifice Christ had to make, you know, that he had to make on top of all the other sacrifices. He was sinless. That wasn't even, but to live sinless was no, for Christ to live sinless was no burden upon him. He even said, my yoke is light. And to live without sin is not a burden, you know, in terms of how your life benefits, in terms of how, yeah, the world hates you, but in terms of how you feel. Like, think of this. I was giving you an example. I'll give you an example from a personal example. We had a choice to pay a debtor a certain amount of money or to take care of someone who had a more desperate need. We did the latter. We get annoyed by the world for it. And someone's life was very positively impacted. That's why we don't have a lot of money, because we do things like that. And you know what? I don't feel bad about it, but the world hates us for it, because we prioritize that which was a genuine need versus that which was a material obligation. Now, of course, Proverbs and all those things say you should take care of your debts. And of course, and I'm not saying Christ wasn't, you know, mocked and scorned. But the sacrifice was when he took the worst of it on himself. That he, you know, he says in the Garden of Gethsemane, if there's any other way, but Father, your will be done. And there was no other way. He had to die because God had to die to himself because man has sinned. None of us can repeat that sacrifice perfectly. And it's not sanctioned to go out and destroy everything we don't like. But we don't have to tolerate it either. And that fight is the fight we're going to have to pick up. And when that comes forward, the willingness to cut people out and leave them to their own devices, brutally if required, a society of exclusion, is the only chance we have to preserve one another as decently as we can for some length of time. And that means we're going to have to do things. It means we're going to have to sit there, and then people will be sent into exile. You know, and this happens in a lot of Christian communities. You know, the Amish practice of this in Rome Springer. If you don't want to be part of a community, leave. You know, Timothy and Titus talk about, you know, the means by which you excel people. You know, you try to correct your brothers, and you accept you're not going to save everybody. Because that's how you have to save yourself. But it's not that you just say, I'm going to accept the world. It's that you seek that complete rejection of the things that you know are wrong. And that's the movement in thought that's required. And you know, all these isms stand in the way of it. Socialism, liberalism, paternalism, patriotism. Patriotism is one of the worst ones. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. Screw that. I don't. To a godless country? No. The Lord says don't make vows. You can't keep them. To the Republican Party. What a low cost. And we lie to each other and to ourselves because we're all liars and we know it. We know it. We are incapable of telling the truth for more than a moment at a time because our self-interest gets involved. And we don't trust one another because we know that I know that my self-interest is not your self-interest. I know that you are against me and I'm against you. And Christ said it would be brother against sister. And that's how we live in this world. Because everyone wants money. And everyone wants status. And everyone wants to be comfortable. And everyone's what, does he have more? Does she have more? Do they have less? We don't know how to be brothers and sisters to one another. We don't. We've given that up. So we can just be ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with knowing yourself, but we don't know ourselves. We know where we fit in the standard. We know where we fit in the game. We know if we're smarter. We know we've been categorized, classified, listed. I'm in this group. I'm in that group. I'm fighting for this. I'm fighting for that. Who's fighting for truth? Who cares? I mean, look, truth is hard. Even people who seek truth, I spend a lot of time seeking truth, end up feeling really horrible because we know our own nature so well that we have self-loathing that's amazing. And why do we have that? Because we live in a world full of temptation. And this is my point I'm making to you about the reality being pulled over our eyes. This is what technocracy does to you. It gives you all these happy temptations and tells you this is all there is. And you fall asleep and you die without even ever heard the truth. And even if you do, don't take me away from my game. Think of football games on Sunday, just an example. Everyone used to go to church on Sunday. Sundays used to be dry, right? You couldn't get beer. But people were like, oh, that's inconvenient. And Saturdays, you spend time with your family. Oh, I want to do my shopping. There's always another distraction. There's always something else. Oh, I'll deal with that later. That's not important. I can wait. It can't wait. It's waited too long. And I'm guilty of this. And look, I have tried every other way. I am the prodigal son. And I know it. I'm terrible. I mean, I am legitimately terrible. I've contemplated awful genocidal thoughts. That will not surprise anyone. But I'd love to have some truth before it's all said and done. I'd love for just a moment to be able to sit around a fire with 5 or 6 people and then say, hey, where was the truth? That's what I'm trying to do with this channel now. You know, I don't even care about money anymore. I should. I mean, if you want to support the program, Venmo, CVC, PRV, you guys help. But I'll tell you what, every month we get the help we need. I don't know how it is. Every month it's someone new. And it doesn't matter because I'm just going to speak truth. I'm not going to mix truth. I'm not going to say, well, speak truth on this, but this might offend you. If you're offended, okay, be offended. If my audience ends up being me talking to a camera, you know what? What good does it profit a man to gain the world if he loses his soul? And I'm trying to get my soul because you know what I've realized over the course of studying my own life? Because you can't do this show like I do without thinking a lot about yourself. Fear and trembling, man. I'm always in danger of losing it. And if it happens, it'll only be because God intended it, not because I deserved it. That's maybe why I think the way I do in my theology. But I'd like to be better. I need a better world to be a better man. And to have a better world, I need better people. But to have better people, I need more people who understand truth. And to understand truth, we can't find it in ourselves. So we imagine God to be as great as we can. And when we start looking for that, then we figure out how that connects. I mean, this is why, you want to know why Christianity took in the West? Because the Neoplatonists that were looking for the ultimate logos, the truth, looked at the figure in Christ and said this was it. And it took fire. The government hated it, so they killed people who were willing to die for something bigger than themselves, so it took greater fire. That's the story of Pentecost. And that's where we are again. And there's an end to the story. When the people aren't people anymore, and those who choose to go out with the Lord or with the world. And, you know, I got in a lot of trouble in the past. People think, it's pretty funny, the way they conflate things. You know, when I got in trouble, when I lost my job, just thinking back, they always say, oh, he's a white supremacist. I didn't say that. I said white people were getting picked on unfairly. That's what I said. And I said Islam is an apostate piece of crap religion. And I still stand by that, by the way. And I know people say, oh, well, I'm judgmental. Yes, I am. I'm not going to go before God and say, no, I said you were just as good as this and that this was the same thing. I'm not saying that at all. No. I would rather disappoint every man on earth than disappoint God. And that's my point. That's the zeal. That's the passion. That's the missing piece. Not a pragmatic analysis of which system would work better so we can enjoy our material comforts. God, we're lazy. And we're scared. For what? This is a test. And yeah, I'm trying to talk up my own courage. I own that. Because I've just been waiting for the world to die. I think a lot of us are. I don't want to feel that way anymore. And even if I could escape it, I realize the fight's not going to end. And I guess we have to keep fighting. And maybe your fight isn't exactly my fight. That's okay. Our fights are all a little different. But in as much as we have this Pineland concept that you seem to like, I'm going to fight for things I think are true. And I'm going to fight into things that are uncomfortable, that the world is going to hate, because that's where the truth is. I very rarely found that the world ever celebrates things that are actually good. And it's kind of a weird thing saying let's call it Tom's punching bag theorem. That to the extent you agree to be a punching bag, you often find yourself over the position where the world doesn't want you to look. Look here, but not look there. I mean, that's the way the world works. It gives you 100 lies so they can hide one truth. And without truth, there's only death. There's ignorance, and in ignorance you can't find truth. And look, worldly truths at the very best should lead to larger truths because it gives a critical mind. But you got to begin unplugging, and you have to recognize you are fighting in an unholy war. That democracy, humanism, economic, finance, all these statuses, they are distractions from the only fight that matters, which is that if you're going to put your soul to the good purposes of trying to become one with the eternal nature of God, in the sense that you are serving his will, and how that works out in the end, that's his mystery to tell us. But he says that's the path you need to walk. And we walk as far as we can on that path, as best we can. Even though we stumble, we lift each other up. Or alternatively, if you say, I'm going to walk a worldly path to my own benefit. And what you will find is if you walk that path, you can succeed. And you can even have morality. I mean, you have a certain sort. But it's a path we have to walk together. And that's a hard part for me too, because I don't like working collectively. I don't like other people. I don't. I used to. But I know too much. And it's too painful, because I've been hurt a lot. My wife's been hurt a lot. We still get hurt. We have people who exist who do nothing more. Their purpose in life is only to make other people miserable, and I actually feel sorry for them. Do you want to know the single biggest struggle of my life? To feel love toward my enemies for one reason, because I know where they're going and how bad it's going to be, how it grieves the Father, and how it's a terrible loss of something that could be greater. And they hate me all the more for saying it. And that's okay. You can hate me. I don't hate you. You have no power over me. God is greater. And I think that's the courage we need. And I know this is not talk you're used to hearing. This was how our civilization was built. People used to think like this. People used to talk like this, but we don't know how to do it anymore. So help me find it. That's what it is. Boom. Yeah, I needed to get that off my chest. Dana knows a lot more about that than you do. And I feel better. So we'll go back to doing news. We'll mix some stuff in, but we're going to try to do more. And I don't know, we had, like I said, we had this great chat last night where we talked about different things. And I'm starting to understand a little bit more what it is I have to do. As much as I'm learning things here, living on the farm, growing chickens, all these things, that's not the only thing I'm still meant to have chickens. Don't misunderstand. I love our chickens, but more is coming. And, the fight is coming, and the Lord will raise up those who he chooses, and he'll raise up those who say they're going to serve him. And that's going to be the fight. And it's going to be on those terms, because the enemy's fighting on those terms. They're fighting to remake the nature of man and humanity and what it means to be in this universe. You're going to have to fight them on those terms, or they're going to steamroll you. So it's okay if you want to be steamrolled. You could fight on those terms. I'm just telling you. I'm trying to save you a lot of time. If ultimately that's your position, and it's fine if it is, save yourself the time. Just go hide out, be comfortable, enjoy your material fall, and do what you got to do. If not, there's Pineland. And Pineland will figure out what it's meant to be, and I know me. I'm going to go listen to a couple sermons. I'm going to read a little bit. I got to deal with some couple things today, and Lord knows we got to water all the chickens. I mean, my back is broken, but my heart is light today, so that's not so bad. That helps a lot. Let's say a little prayer, right? And just a reminder, if you didn't see this, there was actually about 10 minutes before this broadcast came on. You might want to check out this morning. You don't really need to. I sort of did a brief summary, but if you want to get into like little weird details of theology between, Calvinism, Arminianism, all those things, you might find it interesting because, I like talking about those things, and I'm going to do so from time to time because you guys deserve to hear big thoughts, not just dumb ones or things you can't do things about. The goal of this, as always, is to transform you into your better self. So, Heavenly Father, I just pray that for each person listening today, that your spirit guide each of us, that your mercy come upon us, and that your justice lead us to follow something pleasing to your will. It is through your will we seek to see better things done, and we do not worship this world, but instead we worship you in the belief that you will deliver us from all our oppressors. In Jesus' mighty name I pray that. Amen. Thank you, everyone who supports Pineland. Please go check out the book Surviving the Fall of America. I think you're really going to enjoy it. So far, the feedback I've had on it's been absolutely excellent. I purposely didn't make it super long because I know none of us have attention spans in this paranoid time, filled with a lot of useful advice. And the other thing, my books, the niche I fill really, really well. Let's say you're married or have family members who just don't understand why things are going the way they do. The first 5 books basically kick you in the face until you're willing to say no more, and then the next 5 chapters tell you how it is you can escape. It sounds like a book of sadness, but like many things, it ends up being, unlike that fraud Quigley, who's this tragedy and then hope. The tragedy is that we destroyed our connection to the good and the godly in our society. The hope is that we can escape. And I offer really pragmatic advice from actually a more or less non-theological viewpoint of the decisions you need to make to give yourself the time and space to begin disconnecting from this world and surviving for the days to come. Some people called it a dark age. Ultimately, it was an age where we were committed to other things than our material progress. Why did God make us so reflexively prideful when he values humility so much more? The thing is, man fell because he broke a covenant with God. God gave the lesson to Adam that you are not to follow these things. You are not to follow the world and the wisdom that's beyond you, that's in God. And whether you take that as allegory or as literal truth, it's man's temptation to seek something permanent in that which is dying, that we can all see, we all understand, that leads us to these things where we place our own will above God's. And can we know God's will perfectly? No, but that's why we pray, that's why we connect, and we do the best we can. It is an ask we make. I mean, the truth is, God owes us nothing. We owe God everything, and understanding that nature of service is very difficult in a world where we control all things. But how many people die through things of their own choosing? You hit a moose, you die from a drought. In a world where death was common, understanding God was easy. This world has been anesthetized to the point where we are now playing, it's like playing bowling with the bumper pins put in there, to answer your question, George. So what ends up happening, and thank you for the comments online, by the way, I did see that, and we'll talk about that with Dana later, that you no longer have consequence. And the trick we have is we imagine this world in everything has no consequence, and because there's no consequence, because there's no peril, there's no growth. It's like when you play a game and nobody wins and scores aren't kept, what's the point to it? And that's kind of the point. If there is no point, man lives, dies, and finds no greater meaning. But you must be, in the Bible, it says born again in order to experience Christ. So what I would say in response to that is, in being born again, you have to learn to reject the world, and the world has to be at strife with you. And the trick Satan has pulled, if you want to think of it this way, sin separates us from God in the sense that our will and his are not one and the same. And what Satan does is he tries to build a hell out of earth as his own imagining of heaven, where he has the rules and he benefits the people who has the things that play to our lowest common denominator. And whether you look at that through ideologies of saying, we're going to take care of everyone, but everyone's poor and miserable, or whether you look at everyone's going to be a celebrity, but nobody cares what anyone's doing, always we have that inversion, that you have 99% truth and the 1% lie that gets you killed. So that's why service is important, because even though we're smart, the devil's smarter, but God's smarter still. That's my thought on it. And if you want, you're welcome to send me an email, because I know you send me sometimes if you want me to expand upon that, or if you ever want to call. I mean, I don't mind. I'd love to chat with you. Just to offer an idea. And look, I'm not the world's best preacher. I'm not. I mean, I've got a lot of problems, but I try to be honest when you ask me a question, and that's my promise to you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us today. On behalf of Dana, on behalf of Murray, on behalf of the chicken whose diaper I have to go find now, God bless each and every one of you. Have a wonderful morning, a good rest of your day. I will be back. Probably next show will be a Thursday or Friday evening show. We'll see what ends up happening. But I definitely am looking forward to get back to you. And if events overtake, I will certainly be here. Join us in the Atlantic Homeland community, t.me/Atlantic Homeland, if you want to chat more. And you can always find me individually, New Albion at protonmail.com. All right.